an event organized by the MIT Refugee Action Hub React, NAMAL, Karam Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab. We are convening this month-long global convening to seek to really build bridges between diverse communities of learners, universities, companies, NGOs, social enterprises, researchers, and other key stakeholders to work together on the key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities around the world. This year, we're exploring the theme of education and workforce development and displacement through virtual events hosted by participating partners around the world. My name is Dr. Lana Cook, Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT Open Learning and from the MIT React. And I'm so pleased to introduce my colleagues here from the MIT D-Lab to focus on today's session around MIT D-Lab's Co-Creation Toolkit, bringing humanitarian actors and displaced people together to co-design solutions. And so I'd love to introduce Amy Smith, a senior lecturer in mechanical engineering at MIT and the founding director of the MIT D-Lab. And she is joined by Martha Thompson, who's based in the MIT D-Lab as a humanitarian innovation specialist and lecturer on humanitarian innovation. She has led humanitarian programs in conflict and emergency situations for over 35 years in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Martha, Amy, I'm so pleased to welcome you to this session with the Migration Summit. I really hand it over to you. We're eager to really learn about the Co-Creation Toolkit to inform all of our work together.
Great. Thank you so much, Lana. Greetings to everyone. I see some old friends and some new faces as well. So it's delightful to see you all here. My name is Amy, and as mentioned, I'm the founding director of MIT D-Lab. My background is in mechanical engineering, and I've been doing development work since the late 1980s, but just in the last about 10 years got more and more involved with humanitarian innovation. I specialize in design, particularly looking at low-cost livelihood technologies. And I'll hand over to Martha so she can introduce herself as well.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. As Amy said, it's nice to see some old friends and new faces. I'm the humanitarian half of the team, has been working in humanitarian settings for many years, and I joined D-Lab to work with Amy on humanitarian innovation about 8 years ago.
Great. Okay, so we'll share the screen and we will get started. So yes, so we are going to start with a few introductions. So in just a moment, we're going to put you out into breakout rooms with 4 or possibly 5 people in each one. And you will actually be with these people on and off throughout the entire presentation. So the first thing we're going to ask you to do is just do some brief introductions. So your name, where you're from, where you work or study, and then something interesting about yourself. The caveat being that that thing cannot be that there's nothing interesting about yourself. So try to come up with something that people might be surprised to learn about you. In each group, we will have 1 minute per, about a minute per person to go through these things, but don't feel you have to use up the minute. And then when we come back together, which will be in about 5 minutes, write your name and the interesting thing about yourself into the chat window so that we can find out the interesting things about all of us. Great. So at this point, why don't you, if you can remember those questions, your name, where you're from, sort of what you do, where you work or study, and then something interesting about yourself. Great. And so if we could break into the breakout rooms.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. To write your name and the interesting thing about yourself in the chat window. So the rooms will close in about 10 seconds. So great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I hope you got to know a little bit about your group mates. As I mentioned, if you can just take a moment to write your name and the interesting thing about yourself in the chat window, I will describe what we'll do for part 2 of our icebreakers. As I mentioned before, you'll be working in these groups on and off through a collection of activities that we'll be doing throughout this session. So we want to just make sure you guys know each other and know a little bit about each other. Right. So part 2, let's get this, will be an icebreaker where we're going to ask you to, again, in your groups, you'll have 5 minutes. And we want you to think about what are 3 things that you all have in common and 3 things that are different for each one of you. Okay, so we will, you'll have to explore different things and try not to just do eye color or something, but see if you can find out interesting things about each other that you all have in common, and also things that are different for each one of you. So once again, we'll ask you to go into your breakout rooms. There were a few people who joined late, so you might find a newcomer in your breakout room, and we'll just ask you to invite them in. And we'll spend about 5 minutes doing this icebreaker, and then we'll have you back again, and we'll get into the main part of the session about co-creation and the co-creation toolkit. Okay, so if you could send people to their rooms again, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think everyone's here already.
Everyone's back? Okay, great.
Good. Okay. Good. So we hope you got to know each other a little bit. If you feel like it, you can feel free to put the your differences or similarities into the chat window, but we're going to move on to the rest of the session. So I'll hand it over to Martha to do some orienteering.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, everyone. We just want to give you an overview of what this session is going to be. We wanted to do the introductions and icebreakers because we will be asking you to go back into your breakout room several times during the session. And we wanted you to have a time to get to know each other. We're going to talk a little bit about what co-creation is, and we're going to introduce the co-creation toolkit that we've been working on at D-Lab. And we're going to run through a few of those activities so that you get a feel for what the activities are like. Then we're going to talk, and that's really going to be the bulk of the session, are going to be these activities. And then we want to talk a little bit about our work in humanitarian innovation, and with a short conversation and reflection.
Okay, so starting with what is co-creation, I think one of the things that I think is important is to just get a, we look at co-creation in the context of design, of producing something. And so one of the things that I feel is useful is to just clarify some of the different terms for design. And so I imagine that many of you are familiar with many of these different terms. And I imagine that several of you or many of you might also be sort of confused at the differences between them, et cetera. So just so that we're on the same page, we'll start with some definitions. So looking first at human-centered design or user-centered design, that's when the designers engage with the users and they really put the user's experience at the center of the process, as opposed to the technical performance of the design. So they do exercises to gain empathy with the users, and to engage with them so that they can thoughtfully consider the user and their experiences as they go through the design process. In co-creation or co-design, the users and the designers are actually together. They are on the same team and they participate through the entire design process together. So they are engaged in idea generation, in problem framing, in all these separate steps of the design process together, and they are making decisions together, and they are solving the problem together. Right. And in this particular case, when we say users, we really mean members of the affected population, people who have been displaced by crisis or by disaster. Right. And then this idea of user-created design, or what we refer to at D-Lab as creative capacity building, is where you train the users to become designers. So you can see the blue and yellow blending to make green. And in this case, what we have is there's really no separation between the users and the designers, because the users have become designers and are identifying challenges and solving them on their own without external designers. Right? Another way that you could look at this is that user-centered design or human-centered design is designed for the users, co-creation is designed with them, and creative capacity building is designed by. Right? Now, one of the things before we continue is I just want to take a short moment to sort of go through the philosophy of this, because I think it's really important. So how many of you have made something? My guess is everyone here, right? And if you think about how you felt after you made something, right? You probably felt proud of what you did, a sense of accomplishment, right? You felt happy and joyful. And to a certain degree, you know, I know after I put together the bookshelf that came in flat pieces, when I get it done, I kind of feel like I can take on the world, right? So I really feel a sense of agency and a sense of, you know, sort of competence and capability. So these are important aspects of design, and it's important to keep those in mind, because that would impact which of those three paradigms, design for, design with, or design by, you might use on a particular project. Looking at it from a different way, Maslow had a way of describing human needs that are put together in this pyramid, where we can talk about our basic needs, our psychological needs, and the needs that we need for sort of self-actualization, fulfilling our potential, etc. And if we look at this with a design lens, the basic needs really can be met by using technology. So a grain mill can grind flour and that we use to make porridge or tortillas that we eat. A water pump gives us water. A home gives us shelter, right? So using technologies satisfies these basic needs. But design, the creation of technology, that fills these higher level needs, right? We frequently design together in teams, which builds relationships. We feel pride in what we've done, and we feel like we can accomplish other things and we can impact our own futures. So this is a really important aspect when you're thinking about what design paradigm you would want to use. It's important to recognize what are those intangible benefits and how that would impact the way that you decide to implement a project. Right.
So when we talk about co-creation and design in humanitarian settings, this is the work that Amy and I and our colleague Kiwan are doing at D-Lab. We tend to divide it into tangible skills and intangible benefits. So bringing refugees, displaced, NGOs, international participants together in a co-design process, we feel provides people with these tangible skills, because much of our work is around building technologies, it's using tools and building skills. People learn the design process, and the design process is really a problem-solving process. You identify a problem and you follow the steps to develop a solution. We feel that part of this also really helps people build relationships. People learn about giving and receiving feedback. In terms of intangible benefits, often people who are displaced get agency taken away from them. They lose agency. We feel involving them in a process where they prioritize the problem and come up with the solution really is a way of restoring agency and can be a
Hey,
transformative process.
Rosetta.
It builds a lot of confidence. We feel that a lot of humanitarian work scales dependency, and we feel that this kind of work really combats and counteracts dependence. And we feel that bringing humanitarian workers together with displaced people and refugees really helps increase understanding and empathy from both groups.
And we can think about we want to just share a few definitions of co-creation. And there are many different definitions. The way that we think about it at D-Lab is that co-creation is made up of these two elements. One is co-design, where people are coming up with ideas or plans or processes. And then the other is co-production, where people are implementing those things. And those two things come together to create co-creation. Mm-hmm. And this is the definition that we choose at D-Lab, right? So we think of co-creation as an intentional and respectful process that brings together the affected population with the designers or the innovators, and that it includes the entire design process from problem definition to creating the solution, to testing that solution and refining it and eventually implementing it. So we feel that co-creation is an extended process. It's important that all stakeholders, all team members are engaged as equal members and that they can contribute in multiple ways. And it's characterized by shared problem solving, transferring skills in between members, etc. So these are some of the things that we think are important in co-creation, and especially in humanitarian situations, to try to break down the barriers between humanitarian organizations and the displaced populations. So different types of activities may have different levels of engagement, and we thought it might be useful just to talk about that a little bit so we could be clear on where co-creation sits in that spectrum. So on the one level, the affected population might be engaged by providing information, sharing their opinions, or giving feedback. On another level, where they have sort of more agency within the project, they would be making decisions and contributing to decision making. And then finally would be when they have more autonomy over a problem, where they would be leading and directing it. So if we wanted to look at these three elements, consultation is one which pretty much just includes that first level of engagement. And there are different ways that we could think about consultation. People could be only providing input. There could be interaction where there's a back and forth, and there could be iteration where there's a back and forth conversation that happens on many levels or many times. However, the affected population doesn't really have any decision-making authority in this consultation model. In partnerships, right, the affected population is engaged in that decision making. And there's sort of two ways that we could think about that. One is collaboration, where people's input is based on their area of expertise. And the other is co-creation, where the input is unrestricted. And then finally, leadership. In the one case, it's through empowerment. And this is where people not only give input, make decisions, but they're really directing the project. And it could be with the assistance of the designer, or it could be completely independent. So what we're going to be talking about is co-creation. Right. And one of the things about those three paradigms of design for, design with, and design by is that by far the most challenging of those is design with, this idea of co-creation. Because when you bring people together from such diverse backgrounds, you need to make sure that they can have equal say in the co-creation process. And that's why we actually developed the co-creation toolkit, in order to try to make the process of co-creation more effective and more equitable. So I'll hand over to Martha.
So we just want to do a little introduction to what the toolkit is. It is a curriculum for graduate students who are going to be working in co-creation or who are going to be doing work in humanitarian settings to learn about co-creation. But we also feel that the toolkit could be very useful for humanitarian organizations working in, who are interested in doing co-creation or participatory design. And it has three main components. One is all about the participation frameworks to make people think more and understand more about participation. The second is creating an enabling environment. And the final one are what are all the different designs, tools, and techniques to use in the different stages of the design process. So here you see the three components and what comprises each component. Of course, today we cannot do something from everything. So while we will, for example, under understanding co-creation, we will show you one of the tools about participation. Under creating an enabling environment, we'll do a bias activity. We'll speak a little bit about power activity. And finally, on the design tools, we'll show you some of the design tools that we'll be using, but we won't actually have time to go through them, except for building. We're actually going to try to do a co-building session. Amy? So the first part of the toolkit that we want to do in an experiential way with everyone is bias.
So when we want to think about bias, we need to think about the different ways that we perceive and take in information. And there's sort of this immediately reflexive process, which is unconscious and very fast. And then there's also a more reasoned, conscious, slow, both taking in and interpretation of data and information. So these things are they're both different ways that we take in information, but both of them can be subjected to bias. So we're going to do a quick poll. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to try to launch the poll. Let's see, how do I launch this? Do you know how to, sorry, I've never launched one before. Thank you for launching it. Great. So if people can guess, the first question is, how many pieces of information can our unconscious mind process in a single second? So if you could just either you might know or you can guess what that is. So we'll start with the first question. And then the second question is the same question, but around your conscious mind. And I would say, please don't fill in the second question until we've answered the first one. You may end up changing your answer. Okay, we'll wait just maybe 5 more seconds, which could be anywhere between 50 and 50 million new pieces of information according to this. Okay, great. So it looks like the majority of people think that we process about 1,000 pieces of information with our unconscious mind in a single second. But in actual fact, it's about 11 million, right? So our unconscious minds are incredibly adept at taking in information and processing it. So the next question, some have already answered, but let's go ahead and look at the second question. Okay. Which it looks like already people have answered. Okay. And this one is, it's about between 40 and 50 pieces of information, right? So you can see that, that there are very big differences in the way that we take in information and that we are, and that our unconscious biases are based on this huge amount of information that we take in, and it can be very quick that we make those assumptions. So I'm going to share my screen again and then hand over to Martha, which I think is, here we go. Right. Okay.
Okay, so in each module of the toolkit, we have PowerPoints and we explain something about the theme that we're talking about, and then we have a series of activities. We can't do a full module on bias, but we just want to give you a sample of the kind of information that we usually share with people. So we do we talk a little bit about the difference between unconscious bias, which really comes from, it's an evolutionary element, which really comes from fight or flight instinct. And so unconscious bias is occurring automatically in your amygdala. And it comes out of those 11 million pieces of information your brain is unconsciously processing. And it makes extremely quick judgments on your past experience, on information that you've had. And it's not based on rationality or analysis, and you are not even conscious you're making these assumptions. Conscious biases are biases that you are aware of. They do come from your conscious and rational mind. They come from a different part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And we say they carry intention in the sense that they express a judgment that you have decided you're going to make. It's sometimes interesting for people to realize that there are actually 250 types of bias. So we think this is really important to think about when you're thinking about co-creation, and you're going to be working on teams with very different kinds of people, because your biases do affect, how you perceive people, the kind of reactions you give to people, the decisions you make, and therefore the actions that you take. So we feel that it is an important thing to talk about when you are, or an important thing to deal with when you are trying to create relationships with people so that they can work together effectively and creatively.
So we have some pictures that we often show our students, and we ask them a little bit about what's happening in an effort to expose biases. So this is a picture that might expose unconscious bias, right? We might make some snap decisions based on the age of these participants here. So when we ask students what's happening, frequently they will say that it looks as if the person on the right, the older person, is teaching the child how to make a fence. But in actual fact, it was the reverse, and that this young member of the community was teaching a D-Lab student the traditional way of making fences. But we might let our biases around age influence what we think. We also will be influenced by things that we've learned, or things that we have heard, or things that we've seen in the media. So it's frequently mentioned in development and humanitarian context that women are responsible for bringing water to the household. And while it's largely true, it's also true that in many societies, men also contribute to the water carrying aspects. And so frequently we might have this bias towards women and water, but it would be important to test that bias and to see what actually happened in the situation in which you found yourself. So there are some biases that come through what we've learned, and then there are many biases that come through what we see and what's presented to us on the media or by the media. So frequently when the media talks about humanitarian situations and refugees, these are the pictures they present. They show needy people, they show vulnerable people, they show people receiving handouts. They could instead show pictures like this, where refugees are teachers, they're doctors, they're nurses, they're creative, and they're competent, right? But that's not the image that media often portrays about refugees. So again, our biases are impacted by things that we see and things that we hear, as well as our own personal experiences. Martha?
Okay, so we want to do one of the activities that we have in the toolkit around bias and co-creation. So each group is going to get pictures of 4 people who participated in different design teams in a co-creation summit in the refugee settlement in Uganda in 2019. And in that co-creation summit, there were refugees, Ugandans, and people from other Latin American, African, and Asian countries. And in the co-creation summit, all those people divided up into different teams to work on projects. So we're going to ask you to go into your breakout groups. We're going to ask you, each breakout group is going to have a file, and look at the pictures in the file and discuss, and please make note of what biases you think the people in these pictures have encountered in their mixed design teams. So you'll have about 7 minutes to do that. So basically you're going to look at the pictures and try to figure out what kind of biases each of those people might have confronted. Then we're going to ask you to come back here to get another file. You'll go back into your groups with the second file, and the second file will explain in the words of each of the people in the picture what were the actual biases that they did encounter. And then we will call you back to the plenary. So we're going to have you go out to your breakout rooms, look at the pictures, come back, get the new file, go back to your groups with the file which will explain the biases that actually happened, and then come back to plenary. So you will have we had 7 minutes here, but it will be 6 to 7 minutes each time you go into your breakout room. Are there any questions? Okay.
Okay, so I have just put a PDF file in your in the chat, so you should be able to download that. A couple of people who are on this call are actually people who volunteered to be part of this activity, so don't be surprised if you're learning from the expert themselves. But we'll put you out into your breakout rooms now, and then we'll call you back and give you the second of the PDF files. So for now, open the file, and as we mentioned, think about, based on the profile that you see, what do you think might be some of the biases that these people experienced during their experience at the Co-Creation Summit.
And I'll just note on accessibility for those who are joining on mobile phones. If someone in your group is willing to download and just share screen for others who are maybe unable to see or download that file.
Oh, thank you so much. Right. So it's in the chat window. Hopefully everyone has it, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 7 minutes. Okay, I think everyone's back. Martha?
I think so. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So now you've all had a chance to figure out what you think the biases were that the 4 people encountered in the co-creation. And now Amy is sharing a slide again in the chat, a file in the chat, and that file will be people's, each of those 4 people will explain what were the biases they did encounter. So we're going to ask you to go back into your rooms, take the second file with you, and discuss what was surprising about the difference with the biases that people encountered and what you assumed that they encountered. We will probably give you 6 minutes for this. So if everybody can pick up the file from the chat and go back into your room, please.
Philip, tell me, in which room were you?
I am in room 4.
Great.
Hi, Philip.
Hi, Filippo.
Hi, Amy.
Great to see you.
Hi. Hey, great to see you too. So I am in room 4.
Okay.
Salam, I see you've raised your hand. Yeah, you're on mute.
It's just a mistake.
Okay, we'll use it as a hello. Good to see you.
Okay, so everything should be working okay. So you go to the breakout rooms once again.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we wanted just to take 1 or 2 inputs from some of the different groups about what were some of the differences and the biases between your assumptions about biases and what people actually encountered. So does anybody want to raise their hand to share something from their group? Bojan, did you raise your hand? Yes, please.
Well, all the students in our group were young. I mean, all the images were young. They all seem to be students. If you looked at them, I think we as a group, and I think the other people can state what they want. I mean, they could come in. I thought they could fit in on any college campus, at MIT or Harvard or Duke, and you would have to get to know them, who they are, what their stories are. At least that was kind of the way I looked at them.
Okay, so you saw youth and you assumed student.
Yes, I mean but that's not a prejudice necessarily, right?
No, but we're talking about when we talk about these kind of biases, we're really talking about what are the assumptions that we're automatically making about people as soon as we meet them. Does anyone else have something they want to share? Marianne.
Yeah, I think the beginning of the activity get a little bit wrong what we should do, but I think this also shows some bias that we had because we start to compare people instead just describe them.
All right, so you started to sort of compare one person to another. Well, this is a very quick taste of what one of the activities is. When the toolkit itself, as I said before, for each theme like bias, mindsets, we have a presentation that we would do, then we would do a series of activities. And here we're just trying to give you an idea of some of the activities in the toolkit. And we are restricted to those we can do on Zoom. So we just wanted to give you an idea of the activities around, one of the activities around bias. And another really important, Amy, do you want to share slides? Another really important area that's quite linked to bias is power. And we feel that if we're trying to bring people from different groups together, particularly humanitarian people, host community people, and refugees, that we really have to think about power. So in order to, because biases are so linked to power, it's very important that we think about what are the differences in power that are present in the group and how can we address them. So the first thing we do when we do the module about power is we talk about power. We talk about what are perceptions of power, what are different categories of power. So we go through an introduction to power, really, looking at visible power, invisible power. And then we do some activities around power. And one of the power activities we do is to have everyone look at what their source of power is. Is it their race? Is it their nationality? Is it their education, their age? Is it their gender? And then we have people think about how they might share that power in the group. So we try to introduce power to people, but we also have people go through power activities to try to bring to the surface some of the power differences that exist in the group. So we do this, with our students, and we do some of these kind of activities in the co-creation summits. We call these the activities that have to do with the enabling environment. And that means we really want people who are there, we want everybody to be able to participate together. But just because you bring everybody around a table to do a design program doesn't mean that everybody is equally able to participate. So we want to look at things like team building, facilitation, and things like that to make sure that people feel that they can participate fully and to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable to participate. Amy?
Great. So at this point, we'll just open it up to see if anyone has any thoughts or comments or reflections before we'll take a quick stretch break after this. Yeah, Jorge, do you come off mute or?
Yeah.
Great.
Hi,
thanks.
everybody. I really enjoy the bias exercise. I think our group guessed fairly well based on the titles and then the nationalities, how they would have experienced bias. And I completely agree how these happen, because when you bring people into a room, you think it's going to be equal, but immediately there is kind of a stratified sense of how it organizes itself, even from the sitting or from how people accommodate themselves. And it was really enlightening to see how wrong all those biases were. And the reasons why people would guess, and the backpack on the second image, for example, and that type of for example, the African woman that people would think that she would know because she is from a nearby country. So yes, it was a very interesting exercise, and the relationship of bias to power is one that is interesting to explore. So yes, I'm very thrilled about that, learning more about this. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And then just a response to that is we're really grateful to the people who volunteered to share their experiences with us, because we felt that, you know, especially within the context of a co-creation summit, that it was a nice thing to pull out those biases. So appreciations to those who did do that. I also saw Juliana, did you have your hand raised as well?
No.
Okay.
No, Marianne did.
Oh.
Okay, I just have a question regarding the power subject.
Sure.
It's always possible to share our strengths, because sometimes it's a little bit intangible. How can we share our strengths exactly? If you have any comments about this.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that often happens is that in a group, you may have power associated with you because of your age or your race or your access to resources. And so people might give your opinions greater value. And so one of the things that you could do is you could constantly ask other people to share their opinions and then agree with them or thank them for those contributions, or, you know, praise them for the contributions, etc. So the fact that you have the voice, the way that you can share that, you know, and so I think that it's as you're in a situation, you might recognize that people are deferring to your power, and then you might find a way to lift other people up through the power that you have, so you could share it in that way. If you have access to resources, you might be able to share access to those resources. So things like, you know, MIT is a very powerful institution, and they did open courseware to share those academic resources with the world, really, or at least the world that has access to them. So yeah, so those are some examples. Martha, do you have additional thoughts?
No, I think those are good thoughts. But because we tend to, we can go into that more deeply when we have more time in the session, but it's always good for people to be aware of their power and think, how can I share any kind of advantage that I do have?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Are there any other comments before we move on? Oh, it looks like Bodhan. Yeah.
Just a second. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
You know, I'm actually, Ukrainian is my first language, and I was born in a refugee camp, and I feel this is a terrific session. And I actually have been running a program in Ukraine for 30 years, and I've got several groups through social media who are internally displaced refugees, MIT alumni whose parents were in that nuclear power plant that was taken over, you know, professors in Ukraine who were in our program whose offices were destroyed. You know, there's an opportunity here for somebody to help me if they want. Because, you know, this is a group that includes MIT PhDs, Harvard PhDs, and they should be contributing, but they're all a little bit in shock, you know, from this. And I've been trying to organize them. So I would love to have somebody help me, and you would interact with them. And there's some, you know, some wonderful opportunities. And I have some ideas because I anticipated this work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's opportunities here in terms of sustainable development, because Ukraine is going to be destroyed, and then it's going to be rebuilt with Western funds. And so, you know, being partners with MIT is something that I've actually designed a program for. And
oh, great. Thanks for sharing that. And then at the end of this session, we actually have a brief questionnaire or survey that we'll be sending out, where people who are interested in being further involved and engaged with the toolkit and testing some of those elements can volunteer to do that. So we very much look forward to having that, to hearing from you and to learning more about that. Great. Was there anyone else who wanted to mention anything before we move on? Okay.
I think just to share one last thought about it, I was talking with Juliana. She was my professor once, and I said to her, "Oh my God, I thought that Boden was a super important teacher from like the whole MIT course, and he just shared otherwise." So yeah, we are feeling how we can deconstruct all those bias.
Right, and one of the there's a actually, so there's sort of a variety of strategies for overcoming bias, but one of the biggest ones is getting to know people and to really appreciate and learn about them. You know, to really be curious and inquire, and that helps to transform your biases. Great. So we did want to just take a quick stretch break. This is one of my favorite ones. So if people would like to stand up, you can turn off your video. Why don't we all turn off our videos? And we're just going to spell out, like if everyone can stand up, we're going to spell out the letters of the word coconut by, maybe I'll try to keep my video on. Well, anyway, so we'll just stand up, and then so start by putting your arms to the side and making a big C and leaning all the way over, and then bring your arms up and make an O, and then a C to the other side and another O, and then
Amy, I think we are not able to see you.
We're not able to see you, Amy.
Oh, sorry. Well, hopefully you can figure it out as well. Okay, so we have an O, and then to make an N, bend at your waist and touch your toes. A U with your arms up, and then across for a T, and shake out a little bit. Okay, we're sitting for a bit too long. Okay, great. Okay. So we're next going to talk about another aspect of the toolkit, which is understanding participation. And we talked about that a little bit, different types of participation at the top of this session, where we talked about consultation, partnership, and leadership. And we feel that particularly within the humanitarian sector, where there's a lot of discussion about participation, but not a lot of practical pathways for how to do it, that it's really important to develop a framework for people to understand participation, to have a shared vocabulary around participation, to be able to plan effective participation and implement participation effectively, and to know when to use what type of participation. So we've developed a whole bunch of tools about this. And in fact, we could do an 8-hour workshop on just participation. But instead, what I'll do is just walk you through conceptually what those tools are. Right. So the goal of this module is to, first of all, expand our understanding of participation and expand the practice of participation. We divide participation into sort of these two aspects. One is the quality of participation. So how well are people engaged? Are they able to participate in the way that they want to participate? Are they heard? Are they understand? Are they understood, etc.? And then the other part of it is the extent of participation, right? So how does it happen in the process? At what stages of the process? What types of participation? So how deep are the levels of participation? So these are the two different ways that we think about, or the two components that we think about of participation. And what we've done is we've developed a 4-stage process that looks at, that has these 4 steps. So the first is to identify the stage in the design process where you want to get participation. Is it around getting information and understanding the problem? Is it around creating the solution or actually building a prototype or getting feedback? Right, so the first would be to identify the stage, and you would probably have different levels of participation at different stages. The next part is to think about the type of participation that makes sense. And that is a really challenging thing to do. So we've actually developed a tool which first asks you to think about what are the benefits that you're trying to achieve through participation. Secondly, to identify and assess what are the barriers to participation. And then we have a tool that considers those trade-offs and then makes a recommendation for the type of participation that can best deliver the benefits while working in the constraints of the barriers. And that's what we call the participation compass. We also have what we call the participation matrix, which is where we put together in a single matrix the types of participation and the stages where participation could happen. And then each of those cells of the matrix, there are different tools that would be appropriate for how to engage both the designers, the affected population, and other stakeholders, right? So you would look at who is the specific stakeholder, and then you could choose what types of tools would lead to effective participation for them at the appropriate stage of the process. And then finally, we've developed what we call the quality advisor. And this is something where you can look at sort of what happens before, during, and after a participatory event or a co-creative event. And you want to make sure that before the event, you have planned and prepared things effectively so that participation can happen effectively during the session. During the session, you want to think about the environment and the way that people are engaged. And there's a variety of different things to be considered there. And then afterwards, you want to follow up, and then you also need to finish up. Right. And each of these cells in this matrix, again, has activities and guidance for how to do that effectively. So these are the tools and the framework that we've put together. And in order to be able to sort of teach our students, but also for humanitarian practitioners to keep in mind when they're thinking about participation and how they might involve it in their work. Right. And then the next element that we'll talk about in terms of the enabling environment aspect of our co-creation toolkit is inclusion. And I'll hand it over to Martha.
Okay. So why is it important? One of the reasons we bring so many different people together in a co-creation is because we firmly believe at D-Lab that there is richness in difference, and that bringing many different people together from different cultures, from different places in society, from who have different experiences, that brings a really broad range of views and experience. And that is that really nurtures the creative process and the design process. As everyone who works in humanitarian sector knows, everyone has a right to services and programs under the humanitarian principles. And we very strongly believe everyone has a right to participate. So once people move through the participation tools and the framework and figure out, what levels of participation, what stages are they going to use, then we start thinking about what are the kind of tools that are really going to help engender participation. And to do that, you have to take a step back and figure out what might end up excluding people. So what would be possible barrier? If you have a group of people together in a co-design process, a co-creation process, what kinds of barriers would there be to inclusion? Would they be from gender? Would there be reasons that women couldn't come to the training? Age? Would older people feel excluded? Would younger people feel they wouldn't be respected? Disability, are the physical constraints of the actual building you're having the training in, does that exclude people because of disabilities? Are people excluded because of sexual orientation? If people are speaking different languages, if people are of different ethnic groups and there are hostilities between them, So when we look at putting together a co-creation summit or a participatory design activity, we're trying to look at what could the possible barriers to inclusion be. And one of the ones that we often find can be lack of literacy or difference in education. So one of the, we have a method that we use called sketch modeling, and we feel that that's a really good tool to work with as a way of really promoting inclusion. Amy?
Sure. And just so that we're all on the same page, but what do we mean by sketch modeling? So sketch modeling is, first of all, it's very simple, it's low cost, and it's fast. So that allows people to do something quickly in order to get feedback or input or information. And we can use sketch modeling for a variety of different ways. And I'll just show you some examples of these ways. So this is an example of a sketch model that was used to gather information from farmers, asking them to identify what are the places in the post-harvest process where they experience the most losses, so that they could then design an appropriate solution. This is a design that, or a sketch model that works out the details of a design. So something can be made simply in cardboard before using more expensive materials such as wood or metal. Sketch models can be used to present ideas. So this was an idea for how shipping containers could be used in order to make a community workstation and worker space. Sketch modeling is a great way to engage community members. So this was a sketch modeling session where community members could give their input on a urban agriculture project to look at where and how they might like small gardens be placed in relationship to their homes. You can use sketch modeling for getting feedback on prototypes and therefore getting good user input into your designs. Oops. And yeah, so these are some of the different ways that we can go ahead and get information on or use sketch modeling in order to promote inclusion. We were going to do a stretch break here. We ran rather quickly, but people can just do a quick stretch. And yes. And then this will be the transition point where we move from thinking about the toolkit as creating an enabling environment and moving towards the design process and tools and activities. So these are some of the stages in the design process where you identify opportunities, you frame the problem, generate ideas for the solutions, build those solutions, and then get feedback on them. We had to put it a little bit out of order because this screwdriver has a much smaller space for writing words. But anyway, so these are some of the stages of the design process. And again, we'll show you a couple of the tools that we go through with our students just to give you a flavor of the toolkit, but then we'll actually do a couple of activities as well. Okay, so starting with problem framing. Problem framing is really important because it really sets the direction of a solution. And it's important to look at a problem from many different aspects in order to choose what is the framing that first of all has space for innovation, but that clearly solves the challenges that a person faces. Frequently in the humanitarian sector, problem identification and definition happens externally to the population that is going to receive those solutions, right? And it's really important that the end users, the end beneficiaries, have input into the problem framing process. And many of the programs that we do in the field, one of the biggest things that people appreciate is that they're allowed to identify the problem they will be solving themselves, right? They're not told what the problem is. This picture is of artisanal miners, right? And I think the thing which is really powerful about problem framing is that if you choose a good problem framing, you will choose a good solution. So this idea of knowing where to dig for your solution is a really important aspect of problem framing. Some tools that we use for doing problem framing is something that we call a problem framing wheel. And it's a very simplified tools because we found that other techniques were a little bit complicated for the context of co-creation. And this is something where you put the problem in the center of the wheel, and then around the outside, you would do one wheel where you identify what are the causes of that problem. And around another wheel, you would do what are the effects of that problem. And then for each of those causes and effects, you would look at a different way of looking at the problem. So this is a great way to generate different problem framings. And then the team can decide which are the most appropriate and the most impactful problem framings to address. This is something that we find is a really effective tool in the co-creation sessions that we run. The next thing is actually solving the problem. So within the context of idea generation, we go through several different things when we work with our students. So we talk about warm-up activities to get people going. We talk about different ways that you can do brainstorming and brainwriting. And again, there's a whole variety of activities. As we don't have a huge amount of time for this problem, we're just going to do a simple warm-up activity, and then we're going to ask you to do a design activity or a co-creation activity in your teams. But we'll start as a large group, and we're going to play a game which is called What Is This? This is a little bit different than when we do it in person. But the way that it works is you'll have an object, such as here I have a fork, and we would think of as many different uses for this object, which are not the traditional use. So example, this fork is normally used for food, but I could use it for combing my hair. I could use it for drawing lines on the wall of my house as decoration. I could use it for digging in my garden. I could use it to, actually my cat has been bothering me throughout this whole Zoom session, so I could use it to keep my cat at bay, right? So there's a lot of different uses for a single item. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is to, and you'll just do this on your own. So you can either write on a piece of paper or pull up another file on your computer, whatever. But I'm going to show you an object, and we're going to have 1 minute. And I'm going to ask you to think of as many different uses as you can for this object. Okay, so are you ready for the object? Okay, here it is. So think of as many different uses for a hammer that do not involve putting in a nail or removing a nail. So let's start now.
Oh, great, people are putting stuff right into the chat.
Oh, that's fine, although we can hold off on that. Yeah, so great. And remember, I want to know how many different ideas do you have? So keep track of your list. And we have 8 seconds left. Okay, time up. So let's everyone turn on your video. All right, so how many people, everyone video on if you can. How many people did more than one idea? I hope that's everyone. Okay, how many people did more than 3 ideas? Okay. How many people had more than 5 ideas? We still have some people, all right. More than 10? Did anyone have more than 10 ideas? Now I can't see everyone on my list. Did anyone have more than 20? Okay. But one of the things which is true is often surprising how many ideas you can come up with. And in fact, if we were to do this in your breakout room, your team would come up with many more ideas. Because one of the things that happen is as you hear other people's ideas, it actually triggers activity in your mind to start thinking of other ideas. So we frequently will do this activity in groups to get them started before they do a design activity. But in order to maintain sort of a good sort of coherence to this activity, we did it individually, but now we're going to do an activity together. So let me share my screen again, and we'll talk you through the next activity. Okay, great. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take 1 minute, no longer, to find an interesting item in your environment. It doesn't even have to be super interesting. It could be a drinking glass, it could be a salt shaker, it could be a piece of paper, just something interesting in your environment. And you do have a minute, so you can get up, you can move around, you can, like if you have an idea of something, it should be real. It should be bigger than your thumb and smaller than your leg. It should probably not be alive because that's going to be a little challenging. And so that's going to be the first task. So let's everybody, right now we have 1 minute to go get your interesting thing. Let's do it. So come back in before 60 seconds with your interesting item. And you're going to have to do something creative with that item later in the next part of this activity. So the more interesting your item, the more interesting the second part of the activity. Okay, we've got 10 seconds left. All right, great. So hopefully everybody has your interesting item. And now this is what's going to happen is you're going to go back to your breakout groups and you're going to be creative. And you're going to, oh dear, I didn't finish writing this one, sorry. You are going to develop something that uses all 4 items, that adds value or promotes well-being for refugees or displaced populations. So apologies for the incomplete line there. So I'll state it again, that you should add value or promote well-being to some segment of a displaced population. Okay, so if you could please put us into the breakout rooms again. You have about 5 minutes to think of ideas. You need to incorporate all of the items that everybody brought to the group. So either 4, 5, or 6, depending on the size of your group. All of those items need to be integrated together. And you will have about 4 or 5 minutes to come up with the idea and then develop like a 20-second or less pitch. And then we'll have a few different teams tell us what their item was and do their pitch. Okay, so let's break into our groups now. We have 5 minutes starting as soon as you're in the group. Great.
Should we just call?
Sure, just a second. Yeah. Great. Welcome back, everyone. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the things that you came up with. So, right. So we have time for maybe 4 groups, possibly 5 to present. So hopefully you came up with some interesting ideas. And we have each team that chooses to present, we ask you to do it in about 20 seconds so, so that we can go through a good number. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask for volunteers to present their idea of what they're going to make. And when you're presenting, maybe your whole team can sort of turn on their screen so that they can show what their object was, but it's probably also useful if you describe them a little bit. And is it Blaine? Is that how I pronounce your name? Yes. Thank you very much for being the first volunteer. Often there's a very awkward silence at this point. So let me instead turn it over to you to pitch your idea.
Yeah, sure. So for our team, we had 4 different materials. One was a laptop battery, the second one a toilet paper, the third one a coffee mug, and the fourth one wood, which we had the most difficult task. So after like considering different scenarios, the first one we came up with was that since this was going to be utilized in a refugee setting, maybe we could create some sort of system that could actually filter the water. So the idea is to use the battery and also the toilet paper as a filter, and to have the coffee mug as a drinking, and in somewhat ways the wood would be added. So that's the first. Yeah, so that's the first scenario. The second one would be since we have the battery that's going to be acting as an igniter. So you have the wood. So what you would do is you would just wrap the toilet paper around it and then ignite it using the battery from the laptop battery. And then the cup, I guess, yeah, you could have the cup on the other hand. So this was the second scenario. And the third one would be having the cup, filling the cup with the toilet paper. And also you could add the wood as an extra source of fuel and using the battery to ignite it. Then you could just leave the cup inside your tent or your place of residence, and then you would just light your room. So these were some of the ideas. Hopefully we could bring it to life. Thank you.
Great. So we had a variation on, cooking and heating and water filtration. Super, and a nice job with those materials. And kudos to the person who had the foresight to bring a battery. That opens up a lot of opportunities. Great. Okay, so it looks like, is it Skeeter and Becky? Would you like to go next?
Sure. So our group had 4 items. So the first one is a journal. And then the second one was a bundle of sage. The third one was a Wi-Fi machine or device. The 1, 2, 3. Fourth one was a roll of toilet paper. And then the last item was a 3D printed sort of thing.
Oh, it's a lava showing.
Yeah. So we said we would make a wellness center for moms and kids. So because we all know being a mom it can be quite tough. Mm-hmm. So we would have a wellness center where moms could journal. And then the sage, there would be sage hanging in the room using the tissue. We would use the tissue to hang the sage. And the sage would be smelling good and giving off good vibes and everything. And then we would use the internet device to play music on Spotify. Yeah. And then we would use the 3D printed device to put some seeds from the sage and also decorate the room with sage inside, like a potted plant. We would use that 3D thing to display our sage. So the moms would have a nice wellness center.
Great. And
great.
I see people are already interested in visiting. If we look in the chat window, So I think wellness center and retreat location, perhaps. Great, super. Thank you for that. That sounds great. And then let's go ahead to Mikal. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And then you'll be the last one to share your ideas. But thank you. Thank you very much to all the groups so far. And Mikal, I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, our groups, we're a group of 4, and I think we were in a group 1. We were the Nelly, Harriet, Bado, and Arthur. That was all our groups are composed of. So the idea that we came from was, firstly, is a mug. Secondly, is a perfume. Thirdly, is a glass of for which it puts for just a big glass where you put flowers. The fourth one is the fourth one was a purse, and the last one was a bottle. It's a plastic bottle for water. So the main idea was actually it's just giving an insights as a refugee and me being as a refugee, and also what we use in living in the camps as well. So firstly, what we've come from was the bottle. It's just, maybe it can be used for filling water, or also it's just sometimes there is no shower in the camps. But what we come up with is you can cut the bottle into half, and then you can, you can make a very tiny holes. And then sometimes you just can use it as a shower, as just a self-made shower. And the other one is just the mug is like, it's used for, we have this very big sort of a flower vase. So we fill water there, and then we can pour using this glass through through the flower vase. And the third one, it was a purse. So the purse is sometimes it's useful where you can put anything, maybe your money, maybe anything, which is like, it's a very simple purse, but it's very much useful where we can feel any kind of, sometimes any kind of equipment that we want to put it. And the lastly is a perfume. Is we use this perfume in order to, sometimes we want it to have this good scent. Maybe there are just you hate the scent around you, so we kind of want a good scent, so I just came up with a perfume. Or else we can just use to fire up for a fire, actually, for firing. That's what we've come up with.
Yeah, and it sounds like we could put those all together like in a shower package where you have the big container of water, you scoop that into your shower thing, maybe your soap is in your purse, and then when you're done, you spray to be nice. So great. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to all of the groups. And I'm sure that the other groups also had very interesting ideas. If you feel like putting your idea that you weren't able to share verbally into the chat, you should feel free to do that. But what we're going to do now is we did think that it might be a good idea to just talk a little bit about D-Lab. We didn't want to start with that because it's we wanted to start with some activities, but we wanted to just share a little bit about D-Lab. So D-Lab is a laboratory at MIT. We work with people around the world to develop collaborative approaches and practical solutions to humanitarian challenges and challenges of global poverty. We stress those two things because we feel that working with people is critically important. And so the collaborative approaches and methodologies is a really big part of what we do. But we also create hands-on, tangible, often technology-related or hardware-related solutions. We're not a policy center, but we're really working at the practical level of solutions. We do this through academics, through research, and through our fieldwork. And if you have more questions about D-Lab, you can visit our website. It has a lot of information there. But specifically, what do we do in the humanitarian sector? Martha, do you want to?
Sure, of course. We're working in refugee camps in northern Uganda, and we work through a local, a national Ugandan NGO called Kuliga Uganda. and a refugee-led organization called YSAT. And we work with them, and they're to train trainers, and they've set up innovation centers, which you can see on the left-hand side. And there's a group of trainers in each center that runs design trainings, and the participants from the design trainings go to the innovation center to refine their different prototypes. You see one of the trainers there, Emily, serving popcorn that they've just made in an off-grid energy design training. On the other side to the right, you see people who were in the Co-Creation Summit that we just had in Northern Uganda, where we brought 46 people together to refine and work on expanding the impact of technologies that refugee and host communities had created in the design trainings. We're doing the same thing in South Sudan, again through a South Sudanese organization called YSAT. And we're developing these local innovations ecosystems for this time for internally displaced in 2 communities, Duke and Pibor. And you see people there who've just finished a training, and they're holding up their charcoal presses. And in the other slide on the right, you're seeing people actually doing sketch modeling of an oven that they were creating in one of the trainings. And this is our final place that we work in Horizon Center in Athens, where we are working with a group called Pharos in Greece to do design training for unaccompanied minors in Greece, unaccompanied refugee minors in Greece.
Yeah. So we thought that now it's time for us to wrap up. So when we talk about a conclusion, we actually hope that this is more of a beginning, because we would love to identify people who would be interested in helping us with the toolkit, piloting tools, if you want to learn more about it, etc. Also, if you want to learn more about the types of co-creation activities that we do. And so we have this form here that we're hoping that you would, if you're interested, you can fill in the this survey and just let us know what you do, and if you're interested, how you might be interested. So I just put that link in the bottom of the chat window. So if you're interested in learning more or collaborating in any way, please fill that in. It's not mandatory, but we would appreciate hearing from you. And then we would just close with to see if there's any thoughts, comments, or questions for the final minute or 2 of our time together. So let me open it up to any thoughts or comments.
In the last minute.
The final minute. Yeah. And I guess what I'll do is I'll before handing over to Blaine, I'll just want to appreciate the organizers of the Migration Summit for, first of all the work they've done to put together a fantastic program, and also for allowing us the opportunity to participate. Great. So Blaine, why don't you go ahead and start, and then Mikhail, you can go next, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I'll just like to say that I think everyone here really enjoyed the session. It was really interesting, and of course throughout the exercise that we had, it was really fantastic. Thank you for creating a phenomenal session, and as you mentioned, I would like to also thank all the organizers for what they have done. I hope that we will get more chances to create summits such as this, so that people from different areas can come and then just share what they're doing, and then just really show what's really going on, and then just share that impact. So thank you for a wonderful session, and thank you everyone for participating. All right.
Thank you, Blaine. And let me echo the appreciation of everyone who took the time to join us. It's great to see people from so many different countries and organizations. So thanks so much. Mika?
Okay. I'm Mika from Ethiopia. So it was a very such a, as Blaine was telling, it was a very, very wonderful and mesmerizing session we had. So it was just my question goes for if there is, as you were mentioning, there are some sessions which is given to in Uganda or in South Sudan. So it would have been really interesting if there would be, if it could have any kind of platform which existed in Ethiopia. And then if there is what you call, as we are refugees living in Ethiopia, and then to be part of this, we can, as far as, especially starting from me, as far as we can do, we can contribute something which in order to make it, we can help and then just work hand in hand to make it feasible. Thank you.
Great, thank you too. And again, let me encourage people to go to that Google form. And if you're interested in further collaborations or finding out more of the work that MIT D-Lab or MIT generally is doing, please feel free to fill in that form. I see Skeeter, and then Bottom, I'm not sure if I saw your hand raised physically or not. And then I know that we'll need to hand it over to Lana to wrap things up as well. So Skeeter, why don't you go ahead?
Just wanted to ask, are there programs in design that people interested in design can volunteer in?
Yes, there certainly are. I could refer you to something where I think about maybe a third or maybe a quarter of the people on the call are from something called the International Development Design Summit, which is an intense design experience. And there's a variety of people who have both participated and volunteered in those. And then depending, you know, again, if you're interested, we can also try to see what might be appropriate. So I'll again refer you to the form, and then we can try to touch base with you specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Amy, we should, people are asking if we can share the slides, so we can make that arrangement with Lana to share the slides.
We'll definitely do
Great.
that. Great. And yeah, and so Lana, should I hand over to you to wrap up? We're a couple minutes over, and we don't want to keep people too much longer. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I mean, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Martha, for this really engaging and interactive session. I think here we've scratched just the tip of the iceberg in terms of both your approach and people's interest, I think, in this work. And so we're really excited to hear others' feedback from this session as we, as you indeed said, think about future gatherings for the Migration Summit and follow-ons for this community. And so I invite you all to join us for our closing session tomorrow. In this closing session, the summit organizers and participants, you all here, will invite open reflections on what we have learned collectively, what are we building, and how we can create a more generative ecosystem for our collective work in building education pathways for and with refugee and displaced communities. And so I really urge you to come and share those reflections in tomorrow's session, as well as in our discourse community, as well as connect with us in LinkedIn and other spaces. So thank you all again for your time, attention, participation today, and look forward to connecting with you all soon. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.